My pleasure to introduce Dr. Chi Lo. Dr. Chi Yun Lo is a research associate in the Smart Lab at TMU. He is also an honorary research fellow at the Australian Institute of Health Innovation and an adjunct fellow in the Department of Linguistics at Macquarie University. His research examines the intersection between communication, deafness, music, health, and community. Welcome, Chi.
Thanks, Frank. Hi, everyone. I'm here to talk about exploring a multi-site choir study for older adults with hearing loss. And I'm doing a lot of projects here at the moment with Frank. So, hearing loss is fundamentally a social issue. I work from pediatrics to geriatrics, and when we look at it from the perspective of kids, we always look at deafness as a family issue. And similarly, when we look at adults, it's a family issue, a community issue, and fundamentally a societal issue. And associated with hearing loss is diminished quality of life, specifically looking at the impact of depression, loneliness, social isolation, as well as the impact of stigma, such as simply even wearing a hearing aid or being associated with disability. A lot of this all fundamentally stems from communication challenges. And I hopefully don't have to convince you that we hypothesize that being involved in choir-based intervention is likely to improve a lot of these outcomes. That being said, we are focused on a very specific type of study, a multi-site study, and specifically recruiting from special populations such as adults with hearing loss is a logistical nightmare. It's incredibly challenging. Small sample sizes, often lack of control groups, making it difficult to draw strong conclusions and generalize. And this was all made evident by Colette McKay's recent systematic review, although I would argue that it's not really a systematic review. Nonetheless, it still drew a lot of important ideas to the forefront. And that review hit me quite hard as well. I think it hit quite a lot of us hard within the field. My PhD was looking at music for deaf and hard of hearing kids, and specifically, this was one of our main articles. Music training for children with sensory neural hearing loss improves speech and noise perception. And Colette was quite critical of not just this study, but I had two studies that she was quite critical of. But she was really critical of everyone in the field. I don't think there was not a lot of kindness for generosity. You know, might have been an impact of COVID. At the same time, like I'm quite close with Colette. You know, we're both Australian and we do know each other and we get along quite well. But whenever I feel a little bit down about that review, I haven't actually met Nicole Giam yet, but in her review with Charles Lim, they did put that my article was one of the few music training studies in the pediatric cochlear implant literature that utilizes a rigorous control paradigm and pseudo-randomization study. That's the closest thing I've ever had to a love letter in an academic study. So I phoned Nicole like a dinner or something. But just for a little bit of context, this is what I was looking at for my PhD. So we were looking at music therapy for deaf and hard of hearing kids, but that also entailed a lot of singing activities. So it's not quite how they sounded. You get the idea. And surprisingly, actually, considering that the cochlear implant doesn't transmit tone or pitch that well, these kids are doing really quite well. So we want to extend some of this now, and we're looking at how can we apply this for adults? How can we look at it from the perspective of acquired intervention? And what can we do to develop a robust study that will hopefully not be criticized as harshly as that review was. So we're pulling together a collaborative team. We've got myself, Frank and Arla here at TMU, Ben Zandel, who is the SingWell Hearing Loss Team Leader at Memorial University. And how do you say that? Is it Newfoundland?
Newfoundland.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do a workshop on that later, that dinner. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, she's for real. She's the real deal.
Helen Henshaw, as an advisor, she does a lot of work around auditory training. Also, Colette McKay, as an advisor, she's with the Bionics Institute. Denise Vasquez from Groningen, Emma Broom from the University of Nottingham, Emily Coffey from Concordia, Sal Habibi from USC, and hopefully Kai Steinberg and Winter as well from Oldenburg. All of this is a little bit to be confirmed once we start formalizing a lot of our documentation. But what we're working towards is broadly this idea of an extensible framework and methodology. So we have at the very least like a core framework that we want all of the sites to hit. So we're looking at older adults who are older than 65 with untreated hearing loss. So they have a hearing loss that's between mild to moderate, but they're not using a hearing aid or a cochlear. And we sort of decided that this is maybe a good logical starting point where we remove the impact of the device itself, remove any sort of signal processing that we simply can't control. And hopefully, we also think that this will hopefully be a relatively easy population to recruit. Age-related hearing loss or presbycusis is quite common, and a lot of older adults also just don't wear any hearing when they would like to get a benefit from it. That being said, when I talk about this being an extensible framework, if there are other sites that specialize, for example, in recruiting cochlear implant recipients, hearing aid users, we're not going to say no to that. We'll add that to our paradigm essentially. With the choir design, I think quite similar to all of the SingWell ones, it's going to be weekly 1 hour choir training over a 12-week period, 12 to 15 participants per choir, 1 choir master and an accompanist, either with piano or guitar. And we'll have 1 to 2 sort of young support volunteers who are almost there just to hype the choir up, have inject a little bit of energy, which I think is really, really important. We have macro and micro time points. So over this 12-week period, the macro time points just being pre and post. And we have these micro test points where at week 2, week 7, and week 11, we have some of those biosocial type measures that happens before and after the choir intervention. We will screen our participants audiometrically. We're looking for a symmetrical mild to moderate hearing loss, and with the MOCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. And there is also now a hearing impaired version with the This is not a comprehensive test battery of our pre to post, but it just gives an idea that we are targeting musical outcomes, pitch, rhythm, timbre, speech perception outcomes, specifically speech and noise, because that's the fundamental problem that most individuals with hearing loss have. And speech and noise really is incredibly troublesome because in the modern industrial developed world, everywhere is noisy. It's everywhere. We can't escape it. So it's really fundamentally important that we try to address that need. Prosody perception as well, being able to understand emotional articulations. And quite importantly, trying to factor in for cognition. And I think we'll use that to look at like pre-existing capacities, but also whether or not we get a cognitive boost from the wider training as well. And a whole bunch of psychosocial outcomes that the list will go on. So the plan is that we will hopefully have an application with our partners in for January next year, and hopefully start kicking things off next year through to 2024. And hopefully if we can get anywhere between 5 to 8 sites, each with like a dozen participants, if we can get to that 100 participant number, I think we'll be in a very good state to push the field forward significantly. So if you're interested as well, please come and join us. Like, this is a little bit of what is possible with applying. So fun, so fun. So thank you very much. It's time for questions, and I've also omitted a couple of things that hopefully we can just have a true discussion, like, what about control groups? And maybe what about those micro time points and the test battery, which Arla might know a little bit more about. But I'd love to just have a discussion if we have time.
Great, thank you so much, Chief. Annabelle's got her hand up. And then, okay, Elizabeth.
Thanks, that was super cool, and I look forward to hearing about the answers to those questions. But I was also wondering about what strategies would be for recruitment of the people who are have uncorrected hearing loss. Are you going to say everybody out there who thinks they have a hearing loss? No, you're going to say anybody between the ages of. How's that going to work?
Well, I mean, at least with the TMU context, we already have a database where we have this population, I suppose. So I'm hopeful that maybe other sites may already have this as well.
Some of the sites will, I guess,
Yeah.
and some won't.
Yeah, but again, it's also extensible in the sense that if I know, like particularly like Denise Baskensky, for example, she works a lot with like cognitive recipients. So if they can bring in a significant number of cognitive impact recipients, in a sense, like we can have a study that looks at the broader spectrum of hearing loss as well, but we do want to target that untreated hearing loss as our sort of main group, and everything from there is a bonus.
Yeah, it's you and then.
Yeah, just on kind of following that point that most people of a certain age have hearing loss.
Yeah.
And there you can
Yeah,
just do
that's
what you're
we're banking
doing
on.
with that.
To some
No.
extent, yeah.
But I have a question of, are any of your researchers, do any of your researchers have hearing loss?
Well, I do. I mean,
You're not wearing hearing aids.
I would fall into this group.
I'm wearing hearing aids
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And that noise was
Yeah.
made it impossible. Okay, I'm dreading dinner. Okay. But no amount of singing, I guess I'm a bit of an naysayer here,
It's going to improve like your speech.
is going to help it with that.
Yeah.
But it may have delayed the onset of my need for hearing aids for quite a while.
I mean, our main outcome is also not just speech. That's one outcome of interest.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's all of the psychosocial measures as well, and even something like emotional prosody. So we're optimistic that there will be some benefits for communication, whether or not it's speech and noise perception, and whether or not that's actually, I suppose, we might find a statistical difference. Whether or not that's a real world advantage, we don't know. That's what we'll find out.
But I think it's very important to be offering singing to people who are hearing impaired or older people, because they may think, oh, they can't do it because
Absolutely.
they can't hear. So to even promote that is very valuable.
I work with kids. A lot of the parents would tell me that their kids were actively discouraged from joining choir or orchestra.
Yeah.
That's just not on. That's fundamentally discriminatory. So definitely.
So there's a question online, just to include online folks. It's Helen Hensham says hello also.
Yeah,
She says, we are focusing on executive functions as core outcomes for some of our speech-based training. Have you considered working memory updating, attention switching, inhibition?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm going to reach out to you, Helen, and basically whatever you recommend, we're going to chuck in. That's why we have you in that capacity. I know that most of your work has been around the cognitive measures and things like that. So we will be tapping your shoulder very shortly.
So I have, it's a somewhat half-baked suggestion, but it's actually coming from the fact that I actually suffered mono hearing loss and have a hearing aid. And one of the things which actually really helped me was having extensive musical training. So I could go into the audiologist with my own kind of understanding of what I was hearing. And so I kind of wonder now that in the States, if you don't have like a collaborator, and I'm not volunteering for this, I'm not going to volunteer for everything when I ask the question and make a comment. But like hearing aids are now over the counter.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's now this space
where
people can potentially get hearing aids in a less like intimidating context, right?
Yeah.
And then there's also this space where people can get adjustments potentially for hearing aids. Like people can be developing technology for like adjustments and stuff like that, right? But one of the things which is always going to be lacking is people's own understanding of what they're hearing. And at least from my experience, and obviously singing in the choir is not getting full music degrees, but the more that you like mindfully listen, mindfully engage with music, you start to make those connections, right? So it could possibly be that it's not just simply the singing, but the mindful listening and the connection and all of that in the act of music making.
What a great control group.
Which
Mindful listening to.
yeah.
Well, we've run that control group in a hearing aided choir. Not that that's the be all end all, and she's wrestling with that data right now. And it would seem like we did an RCT where we had people with hearing aids, and one group is doing active listening, and one group is doing singing. And I think that was the group we saw on the screen in this very room. And it would appear that there was no benefit in our brief intervention.
Okay.
And we're going to write that up. Like it, you know, it could be that there's lots of other really interesting things in that data, but it may be that there's a sweet spot in terms of hearing loss where there is a benefit of singing, and it becomes exceedingly hard to find it once you've crossed some threshold of hearing loss.
Yeah, but it might also be that the benefit isn't in just that you're going to improve your hearing, but that you're going to have the tools to actually get the technology to work with.
Yeah, it's almost if you have it's language as well to communicate these things.
But how do you quantify that? How do you measure it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's like this would be something that was a very abstract thing, were it not for the fact that now with these over-the-counter hearing aids, there's going to be a lot more opportunity to kind of opening up. It's not just the one clinical setting.
Well, the over-the-counter brings even more challenges when we're trying to remove the device as a bit of a
I mean, for the control, the experiment, it created more challenges, but for the opportunities for like the impact.
You're saying it's enabling you to be your own advocate or improve your own use of the technology, and that's maybe something for us to figure out how to measure in the future. Yeah, that's a neat idea.
There's one more question from Meryl online.
Oh, there. Hi. I just had a few ideas, comments that I thought you might find interesting, because at the beginning of my career as a speech pathologist, I worked with deaf children before cochlear implants were around. And I had one student who was profoundly deaf, and he could play trumpet in tune. It's kind of unbelievable, right? Nobody believes me. And also, we were using a program called Ling. Have you ever heard of that? It's the way we used to teach speech to profoundly deaf or any hard of hearing kids. And it breaks down speech into sort of musical concepts. So you teach pitch and loudness separately, and you teach all the vowels separately. So it's like you're, I don't know if it's finding the perception that they have that you can use that helps them with the speech and communication. And it's must be the same, similar in singing. And I also taught a hearing impaired girl to sing. And she just was dying to sing, and everyone thought she was crazy. And I happened to be a singing teacher as well as a speech therapist, so I taught her. And what I found with her is, if I gave her the starting pitch, it's like she could get the relative pitch right, but she couldn't get the starting pitch right. But I mean, if she had accompaniment, it was pretty darn good. So I'm excited that you're doing this. I'm not sure what the explanation is from what my experience has been with working with mostly with hearing impaired children. And I wonder if there could be an age difference. And so that with the cochlear, I've worked a little bit with cochlear implant kids too, but I'm wondering if the age difference, like they're more, their brains are more pliable when they're young, so they can explore some of those things I'm talking about, and less so as older. But why not try? Because we still are our brains are still plastic even when we're old. Right? So
and also the prelingual and postlingual hearing loss has a huge impact on the auditory system as well. But in our case, we're mostly looking at, right now we're just focused on the older adults, but certainly, I'd love to go back to looking at wire-based interventions for kids as well. And interestingly, when you're talking about, I think, the trumpet player, I do know quite a lot of adults who are deaf or hard of hearing, and they've often talked about how the embouchure is really how they are able to distinguish what pitch they're hitting. So, there's a lot of exploration of like cross-modal plasticity as well, and looking at how other brain regions are being utilized for what we would think of as auditory perception.
Okay, I would love us to continue and talk about the control group. Maybe that can be a dinner topic for those that are around. Thanks so much, Chi.